Hello everyone, welcome to our new episode. Today I'm super excited, and it's Ileana, by the way. You can see that I'm excited already. And today I have with me Dan from UTSOPI. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation, and maybe we can start with who you are and what is UTSOPI.
I will start with the second thing. UTSOPI is the organization that defends the interests of sex workers in Belgium for the whole country. So we are bilingual, Dutch and French, but we also offer services or activities in English. What we do is we are active in the building of a community of sex workers. We organize safe spaces where sex workers can go to. They can exchange experiences, get to know each other, and also be released from the sense of secrecy that lots of sex workers that they have to uphold because of stigma in society. Then we also do a lot of actions concerning destigmatization, sensitization. For instance, we organize workshops for sex workers to know how to be an independent worker and to have social rights, for instance. But we, at the same time, we organize workshops for police officers to come and learn about what is sex work like and what is the difference between sex work and human trafficking and how to treat or how to interact with sex workers. It's very important. Or also people from the health sector, how does a physician best treat a sex worker? So that's the sensitization information part of our work. And then also we have, which is very important in our organization, it is the political advocacy. So our organization has been at the forefront, has taken the initiative for the decriminalization of sex work in Belgium. And also a couple of months ago, almost 2 months ago now, we had the first law in the world that foresees extra rights for sex workers who would like to work under contracts. If you work under contract, it's social security opens up, healthcare opens up. So this is very important. And also our organization has been at the forefront, has taken the initiative and has also been, our organization had a seat at the table with the governments, with the cabinets and the ministers in the drafting of this law. So we're very happy with everything that happened in the past. Of course, there's loads of work which awaits us. And as for me, my name is Dan Bouwens. I'm the current director of the organization. I was the first employee. I have never done sex work in my life, but my employers, my board, are all sex workers. All the members of the organization are sex workers, and I'm very proud to have been mandated by sex workers in Belgium to represent their interests on the political level and on other levels as well. So that's it. I was all alone when I started. Of course, I was the first employee. I was not all alone because of course there was the board and there was the members, but I was the only employee 6 years ago. Now we have a team of 7, and things are going quite well, I should say.
No, that's amazing. Today, I just, as mentioned before, I saw a news article about sex workers having the contracts, working contracts, etc. So, and I didn't know it was the article was saying. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think before that, sex workers were registering for as waiters, for instance. That's interesting, and I didn't know that. Maybe we can just come back to what you said, your last words. So. You're a man. You have never done sex work in your life. So as we were at the first time when I called you, you asked me, if I may say this part as well, that if I want to talk to a woman about this and to have this interview for my podcast. And to me, this question was why would I? I mean, if you're working there, you must be the person who knows. But then you mentioned that some people had this kind of prejudices. So what was your experience on that, and how do you see yourself fitting in this role? You of course are fitting, but how was it for you to shape in your mind, in your career, etc.?
It's always difficult. It's always double. I agree that it would be best if a sex worker, and especially someone who's not a cisgender man, would do this job. Absolutely. And I hope for the future of the organization, it's also going to be that way. It's a bit hard because, of course, like you work very, very, very hard for this cause. And then sometimes just because of your identity, you're being called into question. It can be hard on the personal level. But if you look at the more societal level, I mean, I completely understand and I can also very much agree. Me being in this position also means that I gain all of the experiences while going through decriminalization and while going through the drafting of the labor law that maybe would be best that somebody from the sex workers community gains from. It is more a question of competence. For instance, to start with, you need a lot of background knowledge about the negotiations that are taking place right now. And I've been there since the beginning as the political advocacy officer of the organization. So that's one thing to take into account. The other thing to take into account is that all negotiations are in 2 languages or in 3 languages. So you also need to know these 2 or 3 languages to be able to do these negotiations. So there's lots of practical, contextual elements that come into play, which make that I was a person with the experience and also with these lingual competences to be running the organization up till now. But this has to change in the future. I completely agree. I mean, of course, as being a cisgender white male, not being a sex worker, I mean, of course, I am there also in this position because maybe I have the degree, I have the knowledge, I've had the education. So many things that a large part of the sex worker community has not had in life. So the thing is within my position already, I am gaining experience that builds upon a background of privilege. So of course this has to change. But at the same time, the political process could not be stopped in the middle, and there was no time and there was no possibility to train someone else to take my position as well. So yeah, from a feminist point of view, of course, I am there I am there also to prepare the road, the way for someone else from the community to take over this role, for sure. But it's not been easy, of course, because of course you sacrifice a lot on a personal level for these political breakthroughs. And of course, I mean, of course, I'm just human like everybody else, of course. And it can be hard on a personal level.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think we need allies. I mean, the feminist movement needs allies. Sex workers need allies. So that's how we change. We cannot just work in silos. So we need to break that as well. I mean, maybe your presence in some of these negotiation rooms might be even more beneficial because the person that you're talking to might have so many biases that maybe they wouldn't talk to or they wouldn't communicate well with the sex worker.
Well, it's the WASP thing, the WASP profile of the American president. It's a white Anglo-Saxon president. Yeah, I don't know, maybe if you fit into this picture of being the white male cisgender scholar, people will maybe trust you more or have less biases towards you, as unfortunate as that also is in today's society. We still have a very long way to go. But
No, change is a change. I think a win is a win. I take it, honestly.
A win is certainly a win for sure. Yeah, but well, there's. I mean, ideally, there's many things that we could do differently, and also being run by a non-white cisgender male would certainly be one of those. In practice, it seems to be quite hard at the moment, and I'm not saying there's no sex workers with these talents, but it is a huge responsibility. It is also an enormous lot of work, and you need to be prepared to make these sacrifices. And I just have a huge love for this cause. It says it's about much more than only sex work. It's also about how we view sexuality in society, how we view female sexuality in society. It touches upon so many taboos in society, and because of my own personal history and because of my own ideas and my own ideology, I am doing this job is really a dream for me, to be able to change these thoughts, these societal rules. And I really hope that this work that we've done these last years, going like swimming against the tide, because more and more European countries or countries around the world are taking a very repressive stance against sex work, that more and more nations can be convinced by the Belgian model or the New Zealand model that it can be done. I mean, that everybody, regardless of the choices, especially on their sexual lives that they take, earns the same protection, earns human rights. And this is exactly what these kinds of models, like the Swedish model, the Nordic model, which they now call the equality model, this is exactly what it causes. It causes violations of human rights against sex workers. And that's often been shown by thoroughly done research. And you cannot look away from that. And that is a feminist issue.
No, absolutely. Speaking about violence against sex workers, so one of the questions is also like, why did we, and I say we, needed this organization? So what were the problems? Because there is a problem and you create this organization. Of course, we know, for instance, that we don't see sex workers in society, or maybe they are hidden, or they don't want to mention it, or it's not just around us. There's a separation between sex workers and non-sex workers. So I assume that there are big violations, also abuse, etc., etc. But maybe more specifically from the inside of the industry, you can give some bits.
Well, maybe there's one other thing that I would like to say about like taking on this role within the organization. Just one extra little, but actually big thing. We have had people in the past growing in the organization, taking on a role as being spokesperson and coming out. Often these people were mothers, and often they found themselves caught up in trials of their ex-husband trying to take their children away. Just to give one example, for a woman to be vocal about her own rights and defending her rights as a sex worker is quite something else than doing it as a man who's not a sex worker. The consequences can be very, very serious. But as to the question why this organization was necessary, well, I mean, there's many reasons, but like, there was an inequality of rights between sex workers and other citizens, and that needed to end. Sex workers were legally discriminated against by the Belgian law, as they are being legally discriminated against by many, like almost all other national laws in the world. But in any case, we came to a kind of a situation in which we saw that there was, when people took the choice of doing sex work, they would find themselves faced with enormous lot of problems. For instance, one of the most important problems is that you didn't have access to social security, which means that we have a good system of unemployment benefits in Belgium. But of course, if the activity that you're doing cannot be recognized as a profession, well, you will not have you will not have the rights to unemployment benefits, and not to yearly vacation, and not to pregnancy leave. Yeah. So anytime you stop working, you will have to pay for it. So you accumulate debt, and you have to know that lots of people start working in this industry because of the fact that they have debt and they need to find a way to pay it off really quickly. But on the other hand, we have had cases of people who want to buy a house and they have 3 garbage sacks full of 50 euro bills to pay for it. Who's going to accept that? Why? Because they couldn't open a bank account. Why? Because they didn't have a legal profession. We had people who were living together with their children who were older than 18. As those children were living in the house of a mother who was paying the rent by doing sex work, these children were prosecuted for pimping because they were profiting from the earnings of the prostitution of a woman. So these are like all kinds of situations that we saw, and there's like, we really had to find ways to end this. So the only way you could end these things was by recognizing it as a legal activity, which is recognized by the government. So which also gives rights to the same kinds of social protection and health protection as all other citizens. Only how do you put this on the political agenda? Who's going to win votes by doing this? Well, no politician is ever going to propose it. It's best case scenario, you're going to lose because it's not a popular subject. Of course, it's a popular subject in media, and in police series and everything, and the crime-ridden prostitution sector. No. I mean, there's nothing you can win as a politician by defending the rights of sex workers. But then COVID struck, and because we have a system of we have a well-organized system of social protection. We ended up with a situation in which all sectors were closed by decree of the government, but the sex sector was the only sector which did not have the rights to any kind of replacement income.
Yeah.
Which means that many sex workers risking their own health kept on working, which meant that lots of sex workers from one day to the next, they couldn't pay their bills, they couldn't pay for food. So we saw that, it became clear to everyone that there was a problem. There was a problem already before. Yes. The social safety net didn't work for sex workers as it did for everyone else. And that's how we saw like situations, like diverse situations. But then COVID struck, and then you saw that everybody was covered by social security and the social safety net, except for sex workers. So then you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why is it that those people, of all people, do not have the right to do anything? Which actually, just like this points at a taboo in society. Like you're not willing as a society to tackle the issue, and you've never wanted to do this. And now, of course, you have the consequences. And then here in the Brussels North district, we started providing food packages for sex workers. And we organize our own social safety net, which means that we put up large-scale crowdfunding, and that our team, working together with partner organizations, they would receive sex workers in need. They would try all the legal options. If none of the legal options worked, they would be sent to us, and we would give them a monthly income. Which means that the sex workers organization itself, and I was the only non-sex working element in the organization at that time, the sex workers themselves were organizing a social safety net for sex workers. Meaning, sex workers, people who were thought to be but poor victims that needed to be released from the claws of their pimps. Well, they seemed to be they seemed to have quite some agency, and they were also they seemed to have some kind of talent to organize themselves, because they did something the government wasn't even willing or wasn't even able to organize, a social safety net for sex work. And then this really caught the eye of the media enormously.
Okay.
And then we had there was articles, there was long reads, there was video reportage, there was so many things happening at the same time. And I think every week, at least one time, we were in national media. So our visibility grew enormously. And so these messages sex workers are not poor victims. They have agency and they can organize themselves. There is a problem. We have to do something about the problem with, the fact that that there's no social protection for sex workers. Why? And then, of course, also every time that we appeared on the media, we would say, well, the solution is very easy. We have to recognize sex work as a profession. And that's why we need to decriminalize sex work. And this is what led with the formation of the last government that just came to an end. That's what led to the fact that we were mentioned in the government agreements of 2020. And this is then what led to the Ministry of Justice announcing in Parliament that he would decriminalize sex work in Belgium, referring to the COVID crisis and how it struck in the sex sector. And that was the beginning of the 4 years that lead up to today. And so within these 4 years, we've been able to decriminalize sex work, so remove it from the penal code, and also have a new labor law, which gives the same rights to sex workers as for other employees, plus extra rights that other employees do not have, that sex workers have. So this is this is everything. I'm telling everything which led up to these changes. Of course, beginning in April 2020 up until a couple of months ago, it's been rough. It's been very, very rough. Yeah. We had a lot of resistance. It's a lot of work, but we managed. We didn't give up.
Yeah, no, that's amazing actually. And I know how legislation is like a hard battle. I assume in this sector especially it must be like 10 times more difficult. Now I have 10 million questions, so I don't even know from where to pick. But maybe from one thing actually. So we sometimes the society tends to refer, well, first of all, sex workers for us directly means women. So maybe we can touch upon that a little bit. But then there's also the point that sex workers need to be saved.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting idea. And we never talk about the customer part, but we criminalize sex workers, which is, it's not surprising, but it's still, it has so many biases that I don't know, like if you can explain a little bit on like these 3 points.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, we have to debunk the myth that all sex workers are cisgender women. There's lots of trans women in sex work. There's trans men in sex work to a lesser extent. 1 in 4 sex workers in Brussels is a cisgender male, for instance.
That's an interesting.
It's very interesting. It's not something that we also find in other big cities in the country like Ghent or Antwerp or Liège. But yeah, for Brussels, this is a reality. We always say that there's like 90 to 95% cisgender women in sex work, that there's like about 5% transgender women in sex work and 5% cisgender men in sex work. That's what we say. Like that's a bit like the rule of thumb that everybody everywhere uses, and it seems to be confirmed by the data. So that's one thing. It was interesting when you talked about the customer, because you say that the customer always abuses.
Not always, but the abuser in this industry is the customer, not the sex worker towards customer, I assume.
Yeah.
Because
well, lots of violence comes from customers, of course. Lots of violence also comes from the state. Lots of violence comes from certain police squads. Lots of violence comes from employers, from pimps, human traffickers. Lots of violence comes from other sex workers as well.
Really?
Yes. So there's a lot of violence in this sector. There's a load of violence in this sector. And when it comes to the abuse being enacted upon sex workers by clients, I will not say it's not a reality, but I would say that it is not a good idea to go criminalize the client. If you criminalize the client, you're actually criminalizing the sex worker, because you're making it impossible for the sex worker to do her or his activity. So what you're actually doing is you're taking away the only source of income of the sex worker. What consequences does one think this can have on a sex worker? Impoverishment. And then I think like making the customer look like a devil, it is not being confirmed by the stories that are being told to us by sex workers. It is a very, very, very large minority. Many sex workers start their career and end their career without having one violent customer. I would not say that is a rule, but it does exist. And maybe it debunks the myth of the ultra-violent customer. Now, it's very interesting, this subject of the violent customer, because in countries where the customer, because of these reasons, is being criminalized, like France, like Sweden, Norway, Canada, Iceland, we see that the customer, who is mostly a person who does not want to have any conflict with the law, let's say like the regular Joe, the person who has a wife and kids, or the single, well, that person knows that when he will see a sex worker, he will be breaking the law and will not do that anymore. So what do you get? You get a situation in which a very large portion of the customers stays home, which is not a good thing, because it impoverishes sex worker. What do you get next to that? You get a situation in which people with high risk profiles, people who do not care about the law, those stay. So you get a pre-selection. If you criminalize the client, what do you get? Well, right now in Belgium, we have lots of brothels. We have brothels in the countryside, we have brothels, we have massage parlors, we have window prostitution, and we have beds there. We have There's heating. There's everything that needs to be there for one to do his or her work. When you criminalize the client, of course, you're not going to allow, as a government, you're not going to allow places to exist where this interaction, which is criminalized, can take place. So where does it take place? In parks, parking lots, on the streets. I don't think that's very, very much an improvement of the working conditions of sex workers. Not at all. So what you see, like, okay, so we turn the client into a devil. We say that no woman can make this choice on her own. And so we criminalize the client. So what you get? Well, you get more client crime. You get more violence because you're making this pre-selection and everything happens in the worst circumstances possible. The negotiation time between a sex worker and a client goes down because the clients in the park, like Bois de Boulogne in Paris, goes to a sex worker, and the message of the clients to the sex worker, of course, is I'm risking something. So I might be chased by police. We have to go fast. The sex worker is already impoverished. The client is maybe someone with a high risk profile. So he's like, okay, I only want sex without a condom. The sex worker maybe is in a very bad financial position because of the workings of the same model. So she says yes. So what you get more violence, but you also get more STDs. You get more infections. So from a human rights perspective, this is like the worst thing you can possibly imagine. And this is also what research shows over and over and over again. And still people think it's a good idea because of ideological reasons.
That's true, and also interesting. So then I think this leads a bit of the dilemma, and maybe my dilemma, because this is something that I still cannot decide on what I think exactly. So from a feminist perspective, which there are a lot of approaches. So sex work, one approach says women can decide whatever they want to do, and they do. Well, obviously, we agree on that. But on the other hand, there is this another approach, and basically putting the question in the table. So isn't sex work a systematic reproduction of patriarchal system of using mostly women body, trans women included? Because yes, there are also male sex workers, but still less in percentage. So it is a $1 million question, and we probably cannot have okay, this is it. But what do you think about it as someone who is working in this sector and having daily interactions with sex workers?
Okay. This discussion has been going on for how many years right now? 35? It started in 1979. It was when the term sex work was invented. And so this is also the breaking point between second wave feminism and third wave feminism. Second wave feminism, third wave feminists, they actually parted ways in what we call the feminist sex wars, in which the feminists, especially American, so United States-based feminists, they were taking on pornography. And after pornography, also sex work as being systemic violence against women. Of course, there was already sex workers then, and there was also like a rise, like there was also the birth of sex positive feminism, like in which like they say like, okay, I mean, we have been living under patriarchy. People have been telling us all of our lives and for like most of the last millennia what to do and not to do with our bodies, but they don't say this to men. So actually, where does this kind of discrimination come from? We need to become sex positive, talk about sexuality, improve ourselves like in our sexual knowledge, and also get to know our bodies to get rid of patriarchy. So you have one side that says all sex work is slavery, and then you have the other side that says, well, no, sex work is actually like the emblematic phenomenon that shows that women, by way of sexuality, are able to empower themselves. Well, I mean, I think like everybody's entitled to an opinion, and of course the truth or the reality lies in the middle, for sure. We live in patriarchy. It is true that the large majority of women, of sex workers, are women. We have a sexualization, objectification of female bodies. But to the question, do we have to stop objectifying female bodies? I heard one sex worker activist once say, well, I don't think we have to stop objectifying female bodies. I think we have to start objectifying much more male bodies. And that is also very empowering and sex positive. I found that very interesting, and I think it's happening. But the thing is that these points of view are very ideological, and everybody's entitled to their own ideal world. That's what your ideology stands for. Like, what is utopia? But we do not live in utopia. So the thing is that I have explained already, like how in Sweden, for instance, they say that sex work is a symptom of patriarchy. It might well be. But if you design, draft, rights, and vote laws then that try to end this systemic violence against women by criminalizing a client, and of course not going after the sex worker because you regard her as being a victim in the first place, well, then you get actually an increase of infections, of violence, and impoverishment of sex workers. So that's not the way to go. Do we think that sex work is empowering? I don't think it's the case for most people that do sex work. If I have to make a wild guess, I think that 1% of all sex workers choose this profession because it's their dream. So that makes it clear that for many people it is not a choice out of a variety of choices, but we live in a very unequal world with a lot of systemic racism, with a lot of systemic misogyny, with a lot of we are not equal, we are really not, and we do not have all the choices that we would like to have. Who do we see in sex work? Number 1, migrant women without papers. 2, maybe at the same height, single mothers with kids. 3, trans people. And I can go on. So then maybe 4 is like more general LGBTQAI plus people. Everybody who is being discriminated against in some way is disproportionately represented in sex work, which of course points to the fact that for most people this is just a way to make ends meet, to stay alive. We are not going to solve patriarchy next year. We're not going to solve systemic racism or transphobia or misogyny next year neither. But we have to do with the world we're living in right now. How can we make sure that sex workers, when they make this choice, that they can have the same rights, that they are not being discriminated against for making this choice on top of all the other discriminations? This is what the decriminalization for us stands for.
Yeah.
So our point of view is very pragmatic, and it's also maybe I'm going to get a bit mean when I'm talking about abolitionist feminism, the branch in feminism which is very much in favor of the Nordic model. It is very much a very white bourgeois point of view to think that just by impoverishing sex workers, they will just find something else to do and make a living, as though everybody has those choices. It's also so discriminating and stigmatizing to ask a sex worker, did you really choose to be a sex worker? If they ask me, did you really choose to do the job you're doing? Are you a happy worker? Do you suffer from work? Well, I mean, sometimes I suffer from work, but it doesn't mean I'm being exploited by somebody else. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's better. I'm also doing my best within what is given to me. Yeah. And that's the same for sex workers. The only thing is that they have not been given a lot often. And then, of course, within this world, we also see very often that, so mostly cisgender women, that they start this job, this activity, because of the fact that they have gone through a very expensive divorce, they have kids, for the fact that they have no other, because of the fact that they have ADHD in a very extreme way, or they have troubles with, an attention deficit, or there's lots of people in society who do not fit in regular jobs as well. And those people as well, we see this disproportionately reflected in the population of sex workers. Just like not being able to work for a boss, not being able to meet deadlines or to arrive at the office at a certain time. I mean, this is also something you see very often. People with autism. You see all those things. And those people, they have started sex work, and they might like it or they might not like it. What we see very often is that within the activity of sex work, they discover, I can choose my own timetable. I can choose my own clients. If you're in co-parenting, The week you have your kids, you don't do sex work. The week you don't, you do it. It gives you enormous flexibility and enormous autonomy. So, and also what I also hear from lots of sex workers, and I'm not trying to portray like a too rosy picture about sex work because there's lots of violence that goes on within that world. And I want to say something about that at the end. It is that one sex worker once told me, my clients are like books to me. Since I started sex work, I can't read books anymore. Because of the fact that we have sexual needs, humans have sexual needs, and most men going to see sex workers have unmet sexual needs. But of course, what happens once these sexual biological needs have been met? Well, then that's the time of skin touching, talks, laying in bed for maybe another half an hour, and then they start talking about their lives. Lots of sex workers say to me that they are therapists or social workers. So this is also one part of it, but it doesn't count for the whole sector because there's such a variety of ways of working and fetishes. But we also have to recognize within all of these rosy things that I've been saying that exploitation does happen and there's human trafficking. But if we know one thing about decriminalization, it is that these problems can now be named by sex workers. That exploitation can be shown to be an existing fact, phenomenon, something happening within the sector without them running the risk that their words are going to be used against them by anti-prostitution activists that then say, you see, it is a sector with violence. We should never legalize it or never recognize the profession. Now that we have legalized it, now that we have recognized the profession, we are free to say what is going wrong. And that might also give us the tools to better fight it. And also because of our organization, which is an organization by sex workers, founded by sex workers, run together with allies, we have a huge network of sex workers. Some of them who have already also been victims of exploitation and who are now autonomous sex workers, having this as a profession. Who better is going to detect situations in which there is manipulation, control, exploitation than sex workers themselves? On the field. Sex workers are our eyes on the who is better placed to detect what is going on, what the changes are that are happening. If you criminalize in any kind of way, you're only making sex work disappear, and you're making it very hard for society, institutions, social medical help services, police to reach them. So how do you think you're going to be able to detect human trafficking if you don't have any way to access sex workers? So this is also one of the consequences of decriminalization, and also one of the things we're working on very hard is destigmatization. Not every sex worker is part of a criminal network. Not every sex worker is a victim. Not every sex worker is, well, whatever of the stereotypes that are always being put on sex workers. No, I mean, they are entitled to a place in society like every human being, and you better do it because they're also going to tell us when things go wrong. So that's also our stance on this. And then, so we have one member of our organization who is an ex-victim of exploitation. It was her idea to develop a campaign on exploitation and human trafficking. Partly based on her own experiences. It's an audiovisual campaign. You can find it on our website. It was launched 2 days ago. And so it really shows that, so she's telling several stories. It's like 4 different videos about 4 different forms of exploitation in the sector. And the fact that this has been carried out by like from A to Z, like from conceiving the idea to organizing the shootings to the editing and everything, this has been done by someone who used to be a victim herself and who wants to talk about this and make it clear to other sex workers what they have to look out for. That's why the project is called The Red Flags of Exploitation. But it really shows like not only are sex workers the eyes on the ground, not only are they there to detect, it also shows that sex workers are also there, like they have each other's trust and they can talk to each other what is problematic and like, are you sure you're not being manipulated by your boyfriend, for instance? Like there's many nuanced forms of psychological control and toxic relationships that actually end up in being pimping. But it really shows that when it's about human trafficking exploitation, sex work is part of the solution and not the problem. So you have to, that's all the more reason to give sex workers in society the place they earn. And they, of course, they should have as human beings, but it's also for you better as a society. They can get rid of some of the worst forms of violence that exist against women.
Yeah. I think that was a great explanation. Yeah, I think I'm more or less in the same line. So I'm happy to hear that, because I was also doubting myself. Am I being maybe too conservative on this? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm definitely not supporting the idea to prohibit this, because prohibitions don't work.
No, they don't work. No.
And they further, as you said, make it worse, because then you choose other ways, like it's immigration, for instance, and you die in the middle of the sea.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's basically more or less the same. But it's also great that these people stand up and build this organization, and it's already amazing. I mean, to me, I am in a probably privileged side, and if I think that it should be prohibited, maybe I should shut up, because I have no idea why these people are choosing this, or voluntarily choosing or not choosing, but not having any other option. And as you said, if we exclude some people from the society, where we expect them to go? I mean, there's not a planet B that they can go and build a new society.
No, I mean, this I mean, you can ask yourself two questions. One is like the more like science fiction question, like let's say like there's no racism, there's no capitalism, everybody's completely equal. Do you think sex work would still exist?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Because I think, and this is a subject that I've been thinking a lot, eventually there will be some people who might have different kinks that they cannot make it their partner accept it, or there might be people who might not be chosen to have sex because they are
absolutely
maybe they are
that's
like
a very big thing.
blah blah blah. So there will be, because there will always be people with desires, but not maybe having the opportunity to have sex with a partner or etc. That's
a very important point. It's a very, very important point. So it means like when in an ideal society in the year 50,000, when everybody is equal and people will still have desires and not everybody will be chosen. There is still sexual selection. Not everybody is being found sexually attractive. Which is fair. Yeah. And some people will still like to offer this as a service to others because of maybe a feeling of sharing care. And then the second thing, it's not a question, but if we look at the current state of affairs in abolitionist feminism, which I would actually rephrase as being the feminist extreme right. I know it's very daring, but I think it's true because it's an anti-rights movement, and I'll explain why. The feminist movement has a lot of goals, and one of those goals is ending patriarchy. And I completely agree with this goal. Patriarchy has negative effects on all genders, mostly on women. Now, do you think it's a good idea? So yeah, it's going to be a question anyway. Do you think it's a good idea to think of a way to get a quick win on beating patriarchy by throwing discriminated women, trans women, racialized women and men and disenfranchised people under the bus?
But that's basically everyone. Probably.
Well, okay, everybody, except for cisgender males, of course. But anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay,
if they want to live by that.
No. I will rephrase to make it more clear. Okay. So, feminism has a lot of goals, and one of them is getting rid of patriarchy. And if we want a quick win on patriarchy, we see that in countries like France and like Sweden and Iceland and Canada, it is being done by throwing all sex workers under the bus. It's an easy solution. It is something which is doable, and it's also something which is doable because sex workers, unlike in Belgium, in many other countries, are not well represented. And there's nobody there to defend their interests, and nobody listens to their voices.
Yeah, well, I also wouldn't call it a solution. That's basically like turning your head to another place. Yeah, it doesn't mean that if I can't see them, they don't exist. That's not the solution for sure. But also these decisions, I wouldn't call them feminist decisions. This is also like a patriarchal hate mind.
That's the whole thing, this is something that is being said over and over again against, to these abolitionist feminists, so sex workers' rights activists say okay, so you say it's a problem that for 3,000 years or maybe longer, patriarchy told us what and what not to do with our bodies, and you think your solution is that now you can tell us? You understand?
Yeah.
So it is part of a same system of control telling others what to do and what not to do. In the beginning, the discussion was very moral. It was all about moral reasons and ideological reasons, terms like patriarchy. But it has changed. And now it's in which we see that the groups of the feminist extreme right, they are conspiring to, in international law, make sex work and human trafficking synonymous. And it's very, very threatening to sex workers around the world. And this is happening right now. Thing is, there's also lots of support from the Christian right, evangelists.
Of course.
So now we're in a situation in which, like, the Swedish-minded feminists are making a pact with the Christian rights and the evangelists. Yes, the fight is far from over.
Yeah, as if we didn't have enough enemies, now we have the far right, as you said, the far right feminists.
Feminist extreme right.
Yes, exactly. No, oh gosh, yeah. No, but that not only puts women or trans women, etc., in danger, but also children, for instance, then they can be even more open to this kind of abuse if you make sex work synonymous with human trafficking. Because when you have sex work, it's by law, you cannot be a child, for instance. But otherwise, you prohibit it, and then there is no distinction. Everything
can happen, but this is always the same thing. Like, it's not because you outlaw sex work that, of course, you're going to find people in Sweden saying this. It's completely outrageous. It's not because you outlaw sex work that from the moment that the law is voted or enters into force that sex work has disappeared. Of course not. As long as there's the reasons for people, to choose for sex work exists, there's going to be sex work. The only thing you're doing it with the law is you're just like removing them from sight. They're not going to have a place in society. They're getting stigmatized. They can lose their children if the state finds out. So yeah, I mean, it just gets lost under the radar, and it has negative effects on sex workers and also on victims of human trafficking.
Yeah, that's right. Well, okay, so I can keep this discussion going for days. But it's Friday.
It's Friday night. It's been a long day, but it's always nice to have this discussion. It's very important. It's very important.
No, definitely. And yeah, I would also love to continue maybe with another topic, another angle, another time. But as a like first entrance to this topic for our podcast, maybe we can already wrap it up. When I think about after this talk, what I think is right to do, probably, well, to educate myself first, because I'm sure that I'm far behind than where I should be, but also the rest of society somehow to make aware, because when we don't see, we think there's no problem, but maybe we need to make sex workers more visible.
Of course, and it's also...
And criminalize, of course, because otherwise we make them targets. But
exactly.
Which is a difficult role, honestly. Like, good luck on that. I'm thinking about it, like making more visible in the society without making them targets. This is also like a whole another, I don't know, difficulty probably in your job.
Yeah, as our founder, one of our founders told me recently, nuance in these days is an act of resistance. And I think we live in a very polarized world. And I'm just very happy that our nuanced story made it, that our nuanced story was translated into laws. So it's something to be very happy about. Well, UTSOPI didn't start this fight. This fight was started long before UTSOPI. It was started actually in 1975 in the Church of Saint-Nizier in Lyon, when you had a protest of sex workers who were protesting against abuses by the police. And of course, it's going to go on for decades, maybe centuries after. But it touches upon so many different aspects of life, beliefs that we have, ideologies, and also labor law and social inspection, and how do you organize. But it's very much about why should you see someone in a different way and also deny this person rights because of this person's sexual choices? And that's a very important question for society to ask itself.
Well, we have unfortunately a long way to go in terms of sexual education. But as you said, having this law, it's amazing. It's great. Maybe the next step should be having other EU countries first and moving forward. But also in the meantime, doing some little things in the society as well, because we cannot only achieve something with law, of course. If the society doesn't accept it, and that's why now we see the far right is raising again. We have the laws, but then society is resisting in some things. Maybe that should be also the focus. I'm sure you're already doing this kind of stuff, but I'm thinking on how can I don't know, with this podcast or with whatever, support this period of acceptance in society, maybe. But well, thank you so much. This was an amazing discussion. I hope people who listen this also enjoy it and maybe think about it. Thank you so much again for your time and for the work you're doing here. I think it's beyond amazing. I appreciate it a lot. Do you want to say anything else? Any last words?
Well, no, thank you. It was fun for me as well. And I think a way of supporting us is by doing a donation, of course.
Yes.
But also just talking about it and giving, allowing some nuance in discussions in general, but also especially when it comes to sex work.
Yeah. I hope the message is received by the listeners. Well, thank you so much for listening and see you in the next episode.